everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today we are going to take another look at the Muk Dye that we created by combining all 40 Jacquard acid dyes together into one Muk powder. We then used this color for a few different techniques, and the color really is in this purple brown category. Dusty purple, purplish brown. It is a bit hard to define. Here is our Muk color at a 0.5% depth of shade. So we have 1/2 gram of the dye mixture on 100 grams of yarn right here. And to me right now, I think it looks like a bit of a dusty purple. But in other circumstances and other lights, it does absolutely feel much more brown. So I thought it would be fun to go through my acid dye collection and pick colors that I think are the closest to our Muk color to see if there's anything remotely close. But before we jump into the project, please make sure that you're subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and have your notifications turned on. I publish at least 2 new yarn dyeing videos every week, and you don't want to miss any of it. So now let's go play with this Muk color. This is a Nicole Frost swatch card. I really recommend you check her out. She does more proper swatches at a 1% depth of shade of all the colors, whereas the ones I'm doing today are much more crude, just looking at the powder and seeing the feel. And in the Jacquard line, there really isn't a color that is that close to the Muk. I know that Jacquard brown is much more of a yellow brown. We will include that for sure. But I would say the only other one that is remotely close would be Chestnut, but it's more of a deep red than a brown in my opinion, so it's not really the right color. But overall, Jacquard's line leans more towards a lot of bright colors, a lot of brighter premixed hues versus more muted tones, because you can mix the muted tones a little bit easier, I think, than you can mix a bright. Dharma has more browns, more premixed colors, but the one that I think is likely the closest is going to be Espresso bean. I bought that as a brown at first, but it really does lean much more of a purple for me. And so Pecan brown I find to be more of a cool toned, sort of true brown. And this doesn't feel like Pecan brown at all, but I will include that in our comparison. I think Aubergine will be a little too purple, but it is closer than, say, like royal purple or electric violet, which you can see peeking through down there. Finally, Antique Mauve has that dustiness to it, and on the swatch card, they do feel like they could be related and in the same family. But I think that this color might end up feeling much too pink for what we have here. Rebecca, why do you do crude swatches like this, where I take some powder and put it in the pan to compare the colors to one another? The big reason why I do this is that I really enjoy a lot of dyeing applications where I'm applying the dry dye powder directly to the yarn. So therefore, the color and how the dye behaves on wet yarn, starting with dry powder, is really important to me to see, do we see breaking and how intense and what hues do we feel? So that can make a bigger difference to me than looking at the 1% depth of shade. But I think that if we find a color today that does feel really, really close to our Muk, and I laugh every time I call it that. If I find a color that does feel like it's close, then absolutely I'll dye a 1% depth of shade of both so we can compare it side to side. And maybe we'll do that anyway with the closest color that we find. But even if Espresso bean is really close to this purple brown that we created by mixing all 40 of the Jacquard colors together, that doesn't mean that that color would speckle in that same awesome multicolored way that we saw with this Muk dye. So that speckling application is really the most exciting aspect of this mixture color. But I'm very excited to see where we'll end up. Here is the yarn mop that I used when I was speckling on the dry dye powder, and we saw how it split into many colors. And it's funny how much more cool toned the color that I wiped off of my gloves was on this skein. So I'm actually gonna go pre-soak it in some water with vinegar, so that way we can have it available should I need a yarn mop at all today. But I just wanted to show what we were starting with. It's really pretty with these multicolored speckles, but overall there's not a ton of pigment on it, so I would like to add more over the course of the day. In my full-size catering steam pan, I have 4 cups of water, 1 tablespoon of white vinegar, and I'm coming in with 100 grams of Knit Picks Stroll fingering weight yarn. Stroll is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, and I use it for a lot of these comparisons. But before we start heating this up, I do want to mention that I use these reusable nylon zip ties as an extra tie, and they start out white, but then I dye them over and over and over, and they pick up a lot of color. And I have never seen color transfer from a zip tie back onto the yarn until today. This is a skein of Knit Picks Swish DK, and it isn't really related to today's video, but we may just dye it. And I had it sitting in some water with vinegar for a while with this zip tie on, and when I moved it, I noticed some color transfer. So I don't know what color was in here. Clearly, this is only something that happened after yarn was sitting in the water with vinegar and maybe with some exposure to sun even for a long period of time, but I have never observed this before, but I did want to point it out because I observed it today. Our stroll is actually soaking in the same container as that swish. Both are superwash merino based, and there's no color transfer from this zip tie. So it's possible that the other zip tie was one that just didn't get cleaned off in the end, but I honestly don't know, and so therefore I just wanted to share this to point out. But this is the first time out of, I'm sure, hundreds and hundreds of times of reusing these zip ties over and over as they get super saturated. This is the first time I've observed transfer like this. Here is the collection of colors that I plan to compare to our muck. I didn't go for any of the blue purples because, well, it's fairly obvious that this, if it's a dusty purple type pink, it is not gonna be like it's not gonna be like a violet or a true intense purple. But I did pick Cabernet is probably too red, and Aubergine is probably just still a little too purple. But I wanted to pick these, and I think I did Burgundy to go along with some of these other warm toned colors that are approaching brown. Twilight Gray is a little bit of an outlier, but I did want to pull this in since it is cool toned. I know this is going to be too blue, but I thought it was worth pulling in this gray tone because elements of our muck color do seem like it feels in between this, and throw up those color swatches, purple, brown, and gray categories. In addition to our Muk powder, I do have a 1% stock solution of the Muk Dye that I mixed just 1 week ago. So we will look, I think, for at least the muck at both of the liquid and the powder before we go and compare all of these colors onto our yarn. We are quickly heating up, so I'm going to reduce the heat to low. And then shake up our stock solution bottle of this muck color. And as I remove the lid, I got a little bit on my finger, so I'm actually going to come and tap that down right away. And you can also see some of the color here on a paper towel. It does feel pretty brown without any heat. But let's go ahead and just add some drops of this color right here. And I'm going to let that sit for just a moment. And then we're going to come in with the spoon and tap it out to sort of get a feel of how it might look a bit more pastel, even though we know. We examined the depth of shade from 2% all the way down to 0.0625. but we did a whole range. It feels purplish to me. But now I'm gonna go put on my respirator mask, safety glasses, and I'm already wearing gloves, and we'll look at it in the powder form. Here is the Muk powder. The color itself is very brown. And I'm coming with just a little bit of the powder, which I am tapping on, and then I'm going to, well, I'll stick that on my yarn mop. We'll come tap that out with our spoon. Before I tap it out, I just want to remind that we do get very multicolored speckles from this color. And you can see how purpley it feels. It does break with speckling. Maybe breaks with dip dyeing. That one's pretty subtle. But this is our Muk color, and you can see some more pinks, I think. The Muks are very similar. Actually, I do feel purple hues, and then over there it does feel a little bit more brown. Here as well, I do see more purple and brown elements within those spots. But now let's start exploring some of these other colors. I'm going to come in with Espresso bean first, and I'm just taking a little bit of powder here on this popsicle stick and tapping it down, then putting the popsicle stick on my yarn mop. And so this is Espresso bean, and I would say I do see some blue speckles in here, but this is actually much more purple than our Muk color. You can see like there's some bright pink in there, and tapping it out, I think Muk is way more brown than our Espresso bean. That's really cool. I'll go faster with the other colors, but since Espresso bean is supposed to be a brown, and I was like, okay, the Muk feels like a dusty purple, but this is clearly more red and more purple than what we see with our Muk. So the Espresso bean does break with speckling. I don't know if I've made note of that before, and I definitely see some breaking, like that's a really bright pink spot. This is the Antique Mauve, and again I'm taking just a little bit of powder and tapping it on. This is going to be pretty red, I believe. Yeah, see, it is a lot more red. It feels or a lot more pink even. It feels fairly cool toned on the swatch, but here you can absolutely feel the warmth. Okay, since we've sort of struck out with those more warm tones, let's go ahead and do some pecan brown. Again, just a little bit of powder. And you can see that this time our Muk color is much more purple than, I would say pecan brown is one of my favorite browns because it just feels very, very brown. So I'm thinking, just off the top of my head, that so far the best way to get this Muk color or something close would be to mix Espresso bean and pecan brown. Camera glitch. I just added on a little bit of Jacquard Chestnut. And this color, to me, I've used, it's been like very reddish. It's looking fairly brown. Actually, I don't know if I've dip dyed it, it breaks. But it is a much warmer brown than the other ones I've called, but from the others I've tried. It's very pinkish. This is so cool toned, not quite as gray as the pecan, but it is more purple. Next up is Jacquard brown. And this, you can see how yellow this brown is. The powder, I guess I didn't add very much at all, but the powder is, it's almost like it's very much a yellow brown. It is a bit more orange than these other tones we have looked at here today. I'm not expecting Jacquard Burgundy to be brownish, but it was like a little brown on Nicole's swatch. Yeah. I mean, it's called Burgundy. It should be a pink red color, which I think the zip tie is hiding it a little bit. This actually, I mean, it's brighter. I don't think it would be as dusty as the Antique Mauve, but it is feeling a lot more like that on the ones we have here on the pan so far. Since we're looking at our reds, let's go ahead and grab some Dharma Cabernet and see what this color does. Ooh. It's nice. I definitely see, like going on the swatch, I almost felt some brownish tones. It is still way too pink, which, I mean, is understandable, but it was just worth trying. And as we're on this purple journey, here's some aubergine or eggplant. I'm expecting it to be much too purple. Oof. I mean, I would say it's one of, like, an eggplant purple like this is one of my favorite kind of colors. Certainly, if that's like a real purple, our Muk is brown. It's a purple brown, but it is more brown. I feel like there's a Dharma brown I don't have yet. I think I just ordered some new Dharma browns, but I don't think the one I ordered is one. Ooh, that looks like it could break. So this is Teddy Bear Brown, which is a true brown. I like it a lot better than Jacquard's brown, which is so yellow. It's warmer than Pecan, but doesn't fit our Muk. See, a lot of these colors just feel too warm, much too warm. And so now let's do our Twilight Gray. Which I'm pretty sure, no, okay, that's why I did want to do this. Ooh, look at how that broke. That is pretty. This is the Twilight Gray. I'm actually going to grab a little more. It's not the right color, but at one point I used it thinking that it would be bluish, and it's not blue. It's like a purpley gray, which isn't what the swatch card looks like at all. I mean, compared to the rest of these colors, it's blue. But when you're expecting that color and you get that, it is a little bit surprising. But that broke beautifully. I need to play with Twilight more. The only other true brown I don't have in my collection is chocolate brown, but this looks fairly warm toned, so I don't think that it is the best candidate. In your opinion, which color do you think our Muk looks the closest to? I mean, it is even cooler toned than our Pecan brown, which is much warmer. It does almost feel gray, but I mean, silver gray I don't think will feel that close. I think silver gray will feel too cool. There are elements of this Muk that do lean more gray than any of these browns, but it leans more brown than any of the dustier purples. So I'm not about to go and try to like mix a dupe for my Muk. I think that I might do, if I were to try to mix one that would be close to get that hue, I would do pecan brown, espresso bean, and then maybe even add some silver gray to it. It's hard to know, but actually maybe some amount of the yellow from our pecan brown would cancel out with a little bit too much blue in the espresso bean. So I think that that is my best guess for where this falls. But certainly the Muk color is more brown than any of the colors that I have mixed thus far. So to recap, in addition to our Muk colors, we looked at pecan brown, twilight gray, teddy bear brown, aubergine, antique mauve, espresso bean, and cabernet from Dharma's premixed collection. And then with Jacquard, we looked at burgundy, brown, and chestnut, which today chestnut feels more brown than red, but other times I've used it, it's felt very, very more red. It's a very rich, pretty color. So Muk is certainly unique. I think I felt like this would be the dupe. Certainly the paint swatch feels that way. I don't know what to do from here. Besides, I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes and let this sit here on low heat. The crude swatching we did here isn't necessarily indicative of how these colors would look at a 1% depth of shade, which again is 1 gram of dye per 100 grams of yarn. So some of these, because maybe I added more dye, feel a lot more pigmented. They might feel closer if dyed that way, but I think that this comparison is enough to give us a feel for what is really, really similar. And to say, like, I'm feeling more comfortable calling it, I've been calling it a purplish brown, and I think that that still stands. It's almost a bluish brown type color. And I mean, it is so cool toned. Like, this does feel a little bit purple or a little bit gray. It's sort of just a very neutral color, which again is super fun because if you think about it, combining all 40 Jacquard acid dye colors into one mixture and getting something that is so neutral, such like a perfect canvas for a lot of things, is really, really fun. We may not have a good dupe for this color, but honestly, I'm pretty happy about that because if there was a premixed dupe in the Dharma line that felt equivalent to this mixture I made of all 40 Jacquard acid dye colors, I would be a little sad about the hour of measuring out each color and weighing them out that it took to make it. So I am happy that we have a better comparison where it really doesn't fit in, it's a sort of an outlier of the brown categories of dye, but it's also an outlier of the more purpley, dusty purple and pink categories. So it does fall somewhere in the middle there, and I think that that is pretty cool. So as for our yarn, I do want to add more color to it. We're going to let this side set, then we'll flip it over and add a lot of color to the other side. But the big thing that I did want here today was to see how this color compared to ones that I felt could be similar that were in my stash, and I feel that we achieved that. Now we're gonna flip this and then dye the other side randomly with some colors. But I feel like I'm gonna pull in a little bit more Twilight gray. There's a lot of good reds. And maybe some, I think I might stick with the Twilight gray, our Espresso bean and the Pecan brown. The only reason why I'm not pulling in our Muk is that, well, Muk is a limited edition color and entity. Ooh, look at how Twilight gray breaks. I'm absolutely gonna have to play with that more. These other colors are known entities that you could buy more of, and so that's why I am going to focus on, I think, those three I mentioned to create something that feels a bit more balanced. There may still be some white, but I think I will have fun. I put my respirator mask and safety glasses back on, and a little at a time speckled these colors onto the pan, wiping my gloves on that yarn mop that really hasn't received much color so far today, and then using my spoon to help spread things out a bit. And I continued to add color until I was satisfied with the balance of the colorway. I ended up adding some teddy bear brown and even a little bit of Cabernet as I decided to go a little heavier and heavier and create this really fun, like deep red, purple, brown moment that I am here for. Once I was satisfied after multiple flips with the dye color, I added 1 more tablespoon of white vinegar and 4 cups of water to the pan and turned up the heat a little bit and let it sit for 15 minutes to allow all of those colors to set. After 5 minutes, I decided to just come in and add 4 tablespoons of white vinegar, and then we'll keep waiting. I know our yarn is looking very red right now. I wonder how much some of these more brown tones, because I did use a lot of brown, will come through in a little bit. But we have, oh, I thought that there was like a little bit of color left, but it does actually look like we have pretty much bound all of the dye. Even though we've absorbed most of the color, I'm gonna go ahead and let this sit here in the pan on low heat for another 15 minutes. Then I will turn off the heat and let it cool in the pot a little bit. But since the color has mostly absorbed, I think we are pretty much good to go. As for our yarn mop, we do have more pigment on here now, so I'm very happy about that. I will steam set this for 30 minutes eventually, but first I want to do one more colorway just with our Muk color. And I will use this as my yarn mop for that as well. So far with our Muk Dye, we've done tonals, we've done a first look and swatching, and we've done countertop speckles. But I wanted to try and just do some more low immersion speckles. I'm not even mixing it with citric acid powder right now, but the goal is to take the powder, speckle on the color where some spread will happen, and then let those colors set, flip, and speckle some more. And I am doing this on that skein of Swish DK that had that little bit of stain mark from the zip tie that I showed at the beginning of the video. I, of course, was wearing my respirator while we were doing this, and the pan started out with 4 cups of water and 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. Once I was satisfied with where this colorway was, I added some more water and vinegar, turned up the heat, and let it heat for 30 minutes before letting it cool completely. Let's add our yarn mop, our Muk speckle, and our really saturated swatch color where we will no longer be able to tell the individual colors that we swatched. I have to say, I like that I went so dark on this. It is really fun to start with something that has a lot of contrast in the pigmented areas and less pigmented areas, and then just add more and more pigment until I'm satisfied with the coverage. And I'm really excited to see the dimension in here once it is dry. But the fear when doing something like that, especially when I'm using a lot of colors that I haven't used before, is that we could end up with a lot of color bleeding. And so far, so good. So now let's add some dish soap. Okay. It is a little dangerous to wash stains with so much pastel areas with something so saturated, but also can just be good to see. In general, I don't necessarily recommend this, but I'm also not seeing any bleeding. Wahoo! So I am going to finish rinsing out the soap, then I'm going to put this yarn through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry so we can take a final look at these 3 very different colorways. Here is the finished yarn that we dyed in today's video to try to determine what color our Muk dye that we created by combining all 40 Jacquard acid dye colors really is. On a skein of Knit Pick Stroll fingering weight yarn, we swatched both the Muk powder and our 1% dye stock of this Muk color. And both of those were very, very similar with this, this like purpley brown color. When I compared this to a number of browns and purples in my collection, it does feel like the Muk color is a lot more brown than purple, but it is much cooler toned. There is very little yellow in our Muk color when we compare it to all of these other browns that we use. Therefore, I don't really know. It is a pretty unique color, and I suppose that's good. I would have been sad if I had created a dupe for something that I already had in my collection, but yeah, I guess I just don't know. Now, if you love our Muk hue, I do think that you could mix some Dharma Pecan Brown with a little bit of some Dharma Espresso Bean to get this neutral shade. I think that bringing some of those purples in might help with the otherwise cool toned brown. And well, maybe you'd also have to add some gray. I don't really know, but that's sort of where this color feels. And this 0.5% depth of shade of Muk on top of this colorway that I then layered all the other colors on, it does feel like a dusty purple to me. It doesn't necessarily feel brown, but it really does depend on the light and everything else. So it is a neutral. It is a blessed, wonderful neutral color. I love this deep purple and brown colorway that we got. I don't think that those are colors that I combine that often, but I am here for this. This is beautiful. This yarn mop, which I had used with the Muk color previously and then layered on all the colors that we were using today. Ooh, where's that orange from? Huh, I don't know. I don't know where that orangey color came from, but I mean, it could have come from Speckles from the Muk. Oh, I guess I did use some more orange browns, some more yellow browns in the mixture, and I may have wiped my hands on here, or sorry, not my hands, the popsicle sticks or spoons or whatever I was using on here. But I think that this is just sort of a very fun yarn mop, and I really like it. Finally, we did do some low immersion speckling with our Muk color, and in here I see blue and yellow and purple and more red, and there's so many different colored pigments in here. It is so fun to speckle with this color. To be fair, we did have some purple transfer onto the yarn from that removable nylon zip tie. That did happen, but still, I think it doesn't detract from the yarn. We do have sort of a pastel tan base almost. That does feel like it's more of a brown pastel base because we weren't the lowest immersion we could have been, and so some colors and pigments did spread, but overall this is a beautiful, beautiful yarn. Only one of these three colorways, the speckled yarn in the middle, exclusively features our Muk color. What other techniques would you like to see me use with this color mixture? Off the top of my head, I definitely want to do a countertop speckled with just the dry powder, which we've done already, but compare that to the powder mixed with citric acid to get a feel if we still see quite as many different colors in the speckles. But what else do you want to see? Please let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, don't forget to subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. I'm sure there's many of you who are thinking, Rebecca, it is brown. Muk is brown. Stop calling it dusty purple. But I mean, I do swear that there are purplish undertones to it. And sometimes I do think, ooh, that's purple. Probably because there's not a lot of yellow in it, but I'm gonna stop arguing that point. Even if it is just a shade of brown, that doesn't mean that it's not a beautiful color. When I asked people what color they thought I would get when I mixed all 40 colors together, a lot of people said mud. And mud isn't necessarily ugly. Mud can be very, very beautiful. So I want people to keep that in mind. Because when we're dyeing yarn or something and are doing a technique and it turns to mud, because things that you thought would stay separate blended together and you lost vibrancy and things became more muted, that can be something that is really, really frustrating. But if you're aiming for that muddy color, then maybe you appreciate it a bit more. So overall, I'm very impressed with how neutral this average color of Jacquard acid dyes really is. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.